Recording in progress.
Okay, welcome to the May edition of the Chicago Computer Society Linux SIG meeting. I am glad to see some old faces and somewhat new faces. So that's always a positive. Uh, Tonight, I've got a couple things that need to be taken care of up front. One of them is uh, I seriously want some sound ideas. You can put them in the chat about some of the things we want to try and cover in Linux down the road. And keep in mind, uh, we have to have beginners type stuff like for James and any others like him, and more tougher stuff. I'll call it intermediate stuff that the more advanced people would be more interested in. That's the way I've been trying to do it most of this year. So I'm trying to bring along newbies and at the same time keep more experienced people happy with what's going on. Generally speaking, these ideas that you put in chat will help me down the road because it's getting a little tougher and tougher with some of this stuff as to what I should present. Most of what I have set up for presentation tonight, I'm sorry, we ain't going to have enough time to get through all of it, but my handout has all of the videos, and I have at least 9 articles, and a couple of them might be of interest, especially if you are a Firefox browser user. I have come across here something that I'm not too sure too many people are aware of. They are putting in a lot of enhancements, vertical tabs like Edge has got, and the new Arc browser, as well as some other tab features that have been in Chromium and Chrome-based browsers for some time. So uh, the I guess you could say they're finally going to get some of the features that makes Firefox a more modern browser than what it has been for quite some time. And there's a lot of people that have not been happy about uh, what features and capabilities Firefox has had, so they've gone on to other browsers. Now, I'm going to open up the floor to general questions and answers. And if you got a problem, we'll try and air that out and see if we can get a solution. Open. The floor is open. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay. As I was saying before the meeting, I I have found that
You,
if your webcam is capable of it, controlling it under Linux. Under Windows, we have all kinds of software for different webcams. Well, there is something. If I may share my screen,
go ahead.
let me share the browser. Um, Let me get onto the page so that I know what I'm doing.
Well, you'll be ahead of the
Here
rest
we
of
are.
us.
That's the share.
There we go.
Okay, you can now see my application, and you can see GUVC. UVC is simply a particular term for a webcam, and it's a GTK based webcam viewer, and you can make adjustments. And here down below, it shows, depending on your model of webcam, you may have quite a large number of image controls, video controls, audio controls, and you can do things including, if you scroll down further, you would see you can adjust the zoom level so it focuses on your face instead of getting your whole body in your whole room. Or you can pull it out so that it does get a little bit more of the room. So that in combination with zoom does seem to work. It seems to be stable. It doesn't seem to be straining my resources much. And once I've made the setup, I close GUVC view, and Zoom still recognizes the changes that have been made. So as long as the session continues, it will stay that way. And if you have saved the session checked off in your settings for Mint, it will remember your webcam setup. And it's just a simple, it's not as simple as some interfaces. There is a simpler interface with another piece of software, but it's command line. So as GUIs go, this is a really nice one. It allows you to do fancy things, but you can also just play with the sliders and not worry about the numbers. So that I will unshare.
Offhand, Bob, what make and model of web browser are you using? Webcam.
My webcam is a Logitech 615 C615, which is a fairly capable one. It also works on my Brio 100, which is much less capable, although there are things it can't do with the Brio. And it even works with older Logitech. I haven't tried it on other brands, but I'm quite sure that even no-name brands will work with it, depending on the features they support.
That sounds like an interesting little piece of software. I'm going to have to look into that one.
And you may have noticed that in Mint, if you go to one of these pages that's part of the Mint community and it offers a download, there's a single button, download and install. It will ask you to allow open SI something or another to it's ODG, open ODG to open, and then it'll download and it will install just as though you would go into an app store.
You're using the software manager, right?
It does that in the background on these particular pages.
Okay.
Because they're part of the Mint community pages.
Right. All right. Just wanted to make sure.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So can you access it through the software manager in Mint, or do you have to go to a web page?
No, you don't have to go to the web page. Let me see if it is in Synaptic. I think it is. I'll have to get into Synaptic.
You go into that one. I'm going into the software manager. Yeah. Or trying to. Okay. GTD. Oops.
Let me do this again. That didn't work. I don't seem to be able to get my password to work.
Okay, on Software Manager, it's G as in George, U as in a universe, V as in Victor, C as in Charlie, View.
Okay.
It's the same program, I'm sure.
Yeah.
In fact, hang on a second here. There's what I'm talking about. This one here.
Yeah, that'll probably be it.
Yep.
Sure looks like it.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, now I'll see whether it's in Synaptic. We're looking for GUVC view. Yep. Okay. It's in there, and it has 3 packages.
Okay, you got
and when you pull down the first 2 packages, it will probably show other things in Synaptic that will be pulled down with it. And in the software manager, it'll show other things.
Yes, that's normal, but and that's for dependency needs.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as far as most software, usually you've got 3 ways of getting software into your system. You can do it from the command line. You can do it from the software manager, which is like Microsoft Store on 10 and 11. And you can do it through the Synaptics, which is also a software manager in many, but not all distributions of Linux.
Yeah.
So that
So anyway, there are webcam controls in Linux.
that's good.
I want to thank you for that, Bob.
You need a better string, Peter.
What do you mean?
Your voice doesn't get turned on quick enough to pick up all of it, and then it drops off quickly.
Okay, so I'm going to have to talk slower
Yes.
and thank Bob for that piece of software he just brought in.
Yeah, I got the thanks. You're welcome.
All right. Yeah. Well, James and Jeff, Peter's in Hawaii, so you got to understand the problems of communications with the underwater cable system that is being used, and the military uses it too.
Yes. And as you know, the Middle East is sort of under a lot of activity with the military right now. And the supercomputer here on Maui controls all of the military for the entire Pacific and Middle East.
They don't have the computer in Honolulu. I mean, not Honolulu. In I can't even think of the name now. Pearl Harbor.
No, they don't. The computer's over here on Maui because they were going to, if you think of war games, they're going to attack Pearl Harbor.
Okay, but
And
then why not?
if the Pearl, then they would lose all their connectivity. But since the main pipe comes to Maui into this computer here, and we have the satellites here,
Why doesn't it exist on Hawaii Island? You know, the big one.
you know, the personnel required for a supercomputer and the support and everything else, it makes it better for them to have it in one place. Now they have computers over and they have the pipe going over there. And they have the pipes going all the way up to Kauai because they've got some of the satellites in Kauai on the far north side. But when they originally put in the undersea detection circuits for the Soviet subs in the 50s, they brought all those pipes into Maui.
Oh well. At any rate, is there any other problems or issues that anybody has to share with the rest? Bob had a good one. Come on, guys, you got to share things. I've shared a lot in the past. All right, then we'll get on to the meeting, I guess, for some unknown reason. Darn it. I'm going to stop that share to change which one I'm looking at. Oh, it's that one. I got the wrong one. That's why. Okay, I want that one. There we go. That's a little bit better. And we'll take that one down. Now,
Tim, why don't we do open source alternatives to the most popular productivity apps?
Pardon now?
I'm looking at your first email,
Well,
and last one down.
the second one contains more. Okay, hang on those for a minute. I gotta stop and think what the hell I'm doing here. Come on, get out of my way. Talk about intrusion. Come on. All right, be that way. I can get around you one way or the other. Oh. Wow, hang loose for a minute here. It didn't copy. It's not responding right. Come on. All right, now. Okay, now, which one were you talking about, Peter?
The open source alternatives to the third one down.
No, it ain't
The link on mine doesn't work in Google.
Whoops. I know. I'm not sharing sound. This is more advanced, but that's okay. Sooner or later. Yes, okay.
Replace Photoshop with GIMP or Microsoft Office with LibreOffice. We have all heard, or in some cases said, these words, and they are good recommendations, but they are a bit overplayed. But what about a lot of other very popular proprietary apps like Obsidian, Notion, Microsoft Teams or Slack, Acrobat Editor, VS Code, Trello, and more? Well, I do have some good open source alternatives that I want to recommend in this video. And if you have other alternatives, don't hesitate to share them down in the comment section below so everyone can benefit. And speaking of open source tools, how about our sponsor? This video is sponsored by Thunderbird. Most of you probably know about it, but for those who don't, it's an all-in-one suite that handles email, calendar, contacts, tasks, RSS feeds, and chats. Thunderbird recently received a giant update with a full redesign of the app that makes it easier than ever to set up your accounts and to be productive. The interface is very customizable with multiple choices for interface density, view modes, panels, and the ability to place any button you need in the top bar. After this update, Thunderbird is now my email and calendar client of choice. Also, it's fully open source, it's free of charge, and it's available for any Linux distribution, Windows, and macOS. So whether you used Thunderbird in the past or not, click the link in the description below and give the new release a try. You will not regret it. So one app that everyone talked about for a while is Obsidian. And it's great. It offers the ability to link nodes together bidirectionally, so links go both ways. It uses Markdown and plain text to store your notes. It has a plugin ecosystem. or knowledge graph that lets you explore topics and the relationships between your notes is awesome. But it's proprietary, so if you prefer your apps to be free software, then let's look at Logseq. This one is published under the GNU 8 GPL, and it does everything Obsidian does. It takes notes as markdown files, it has more than 150 plugins and a bunch of themes, it has mobile apps, it's private, and it does have the same linking features and knowledge graph. It even lets you create queries to generate tables with all the information you need based on the links and the data you entered in your notes. What this means is that, like Obsidian, it can be used for simple note-taking or for ultra-evolved workflows, research projects, and knowledge bases. Something that, if you're like me, you always wanted to do, but never took the time or never really actually had a use for. Now, Logseq even offers their own syncing solution if you want that, although since notes are stored as plain text files, you can also just sync them using whatever cloud storage solution you prefer. They also have a new whiteboard feature to let you place your thoughts on a canvas and organize things before writing a fully detailed note. It's available for Linux as an app image and for macOS, Windows, iOS, and Android. And of course, Logseq isn't a complete drop-in replacement for Obsidian, as some of their features don't work in the same way, and Obsidian still has more plugins, so some use cases probably won't be covered entirely. But I can confidently say that most Obsidian users should be able to move to Logseq without too much trouble. Well, apart from actually migrating your Obsidian vault of notes to Logseq, which might take a little bit of time. Another really powerful app is Notion. In a way, it sort of fills the same role as Obsidian, but in a more visual way. You can create notes, to-do lists, tables, boards, wikis, and anything in between with a lot of templates. And while it's free of charge, it's proprietary and doesn't have an official Linux version. Now granted, it's a web app, so you can always use it in your web browser. But again, if you're like me, using an app in a web browser just doesn't cut it. It just doesn't feel right. The closest thing you can find in the open source world will be either AppFlowy or Anytype. AppFlowy is really close, but it's not as feature complete just yet. It's open source, it's available for Linux from FlatHub. You can create your own structure with pages and subpages, and you have a few page types like calendars, boards, tables, or documents. You can also mix these types on the same page, like having a board with cards that you can also present in a table or on a calendar, but you won't get as many templates as what Notion offers. Your text notes can have a lot of formatting with headers, images, checkboxes, lists, quotes, code blocks, and equations. Tables can use a large variety of column types like dates, selectors, URLs, checkboxes, and more. And boards handle statuses, dates, and all the properties you can add in a table as well. It also lets you use OpenAI if you want to write drafts that you can edit later. Yay! More AI stuff! So cool! But AppFlowy also doesn't have mobile apps yet, they're being worked on, and it doesn't quite let you build wikis, although you can link pages with one another if you want. If you want a more full-featured app, there's Anytype instead. It's also open source and it has a Linux client and mobile apps. But the interface is a bit more involved and less clear to start with than AppFlowy. They have a very solid roadmap for what's coming in 2024 as well, and it already supports everything that AppFlowy does and a bit more. Now, AppFlowy lets you work completely locally without an account and doesn't have native sync capabilities, while Anytype lets you work offline or sync online using encrypted peer-to-peer syncing. Basically, if you use Notion for very simple, single-type pages, then AppFlowy is probably good enough and simple enough. If you use Notion in very involved ways, then Anytype is probably going to work better for you. Also, their website uses the old Apple font, which for some old nerd like me is actually pretty fun. Not that it has any bearing on the quality of the app itself anyways. Now, for this one, you might not have as much control over, because generally a company or a project will impose Slack or Microsoft Teams on you, and you can't really change that. But if you have all the power to make the decisions, then you might want to take a look at Mattermost. It's a fully open source Slack/Microsoft Teams alternative that you can self-host easily using Docker or any other method you prefer. It lets you create channels and chat with side threads. It has file sharing, screen sharing, and audio calls. It can be integrated with a bunch of developer tools to automate things. You can format messages with Markdown or code snippets, and all messages can be archived with full history search. If you don't want to self-host, they also have plans you can pay for as well, with added professional support and a few more advanced enterprise features. The only thing it lacks really is video calls. You will have to plug something else in like Jitsi or Big Blue Button, but there are integrations available to make that transition completely seamless while you use Mattermost. Now, if all you need to organize yourself or your project is a board, you might use Trello, and this one is pretty easy to replace. You can just use Focal Board. You can either self-host it if you want to let multiple people access the same boards, or you can just use it as a personal app with a macOS, Windows, and Linux application. Focal Board has plenty of templates for projects, for content planning, for roadmaps, for meetings, and more. And it supports real-time collaboration with comments on cards, mentions, and permissions. It is fully open source, of course, and you can present things as boards, lists, calendars, or galleries. It lets you create an unlimited number of boards for free. You can have your own custom attributes in each board. It supports backup and archiving and file sharing in cards as well. So you could theoretically use it as a replacement for Notion as well, if you use Notion with boards and tables mostly, but I personally always saw it more as a Trello replacement. Focal Boards does lack a few things compared to Trello, notably mobile apps, integrations with other services and apps, and it also has less templates. But if you don't mind creating your own boards from scratch and you don't care about integrations and mobile, Focal Board is probably the best thing out there. Apart from the fact that I'm probably pronouncing this name wrong all the time and it sounds like something else entirely, but I also don't know how to say it any other way. Now, if you need to create and edit PDF documents, you might use Acrobat Pro from Adobe. And if all you need is to create PDFs, then you do not need a dedicated app just for that. Make your document in whatever app you're comfortable with and export it as a PDF. But if you need to modify PDF documents, then you might be starved for high-quality apps. You can always open them in GIMP, in Inkscape, or LibreOffice Draw, but these tend to either open a single page or break the document's formatting. LibreOffice Draw does a great job if you have all the fonts used in the PDF that are also installed on your system. But editing text is generally handled in a line-per-line basis, instead of recognizing things as paragraphs, which can be a pain to deal with. And of course, PDF is not a format that you're supposed to edit. So in most cases, your best bet is to actually edit the original version of the document if you created it, or to ask the person who sent it to you to send you an editable format. But in some cases, that's just not an option. Now, Visual Studio Code's code is licensed under the MIT license, so it is an open source / free software project. But the binary you can get from Microsoft isn't open source, and it includes some telemetry and some tracking. The alternative, thus, is easy. It's VS Codium. It's built on the open source parts of VS Code, but it removes all the tracking, the telemetry, and the proprietary components. It's compatible with VS Code's plugins and extensions, and it has the exact same interface and features, but in a nice open source format. It's available for Windows, for macOS, and for Linux as a deb and RPM or on FlatHub. It does have a few restrictions compared to VS Code, notably for specific Microsoft extensions that cannot run outside of VS Code itself. It also uses another extension store that isn't the one Microsoft uses, since this one is proprietary. But you should be able to find most of what you would actually want to use in there. Unless you work with specific Microsoft technologies, you'll find the exact same interface and the exact same plugins, but in open source format. It's a no-brainer. And now for a few other recommendations for nice open source apps and services to replace your proprietary software with. To begin with, there's the good old Nextcloud. It's your fully open source replacement for stuff like Office 365 or Google Workspace. It handles file storage and sharing, collaboration, chat and video calls. It can integrate with open source Office suites like Collabora Online and OnlyOffice, and it has a ton of additional apps that you can add to it. It is what I use every day to run this channel and accomplish all the work related to actually publishing these videos. It's great, it receives updates really often, and it's super modular. I can't recommend it enough, which you might have noticed since I talk about it in almost every video. If you use Outlook for email, take a look at Thunderbird. The new interface is now wonderful, and it handles tasks, calendars, and emails really well. And if you need to plug into an Exchange server, there's a plugin for that as well, just like for virtually anything you would want to do in the app, like sticky notes, adding links to Nextcloud files, templates, and more. Yes, they are this video sponsor, but they're also my email client of choice that I use every day. The new version is really good. If you have other cool alternatives to all these apps or to other proprietary apps that a lot of people use, don't hesitate to let us know down there in the comments so everyone can benefit. And in the meantime, I will let you know about our sponsor. If you're a Linux user and you're planning to upgrade your computer to something new, stop buying devices that ship with Windows pre-installed and crossing your fingers so that your favorite Linux distro just runs on your new thing. Buy something that supports Linux out of the box from Tuxedo, our sponsor. They sell laptops and desktops that ship with Linux out of the box. All the hardware that they pack is specifically picked because it runs Linux really well, and they actually submit patches upstream to fix all the little problems and compatibility issues that you might encounter. They have a big range of devices that should cover every need and every price point, whether you're looking for a laptop, a NUC, a giant tower, something for gaming, something for productivity. You can select the components you want. You can also select the keyboard layout you want on your laptop, have your own logo or your company's logo engraved on the lid. You decide everything. All the laptops are also openable, repairable, and upgradable, including the RAM, the SSD, and the battery, and sometimes even the wireless card. So if you need a new computer, don't buy something that runs Windows, buy something that runs Linux from the link in the description below from Tuxedo. So thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did...
Okay, we're gonna kill that one. Because it's done. Any comments or opinions?
Was a little bit fast and was a little bit advanced. But then
Well,
you did put it in the advanced section. And one thing, Tim, in the email, the things that have the underlines, they're not actually links.
I don't understand what you're saying there on that.
Okay, when the email, if you try to click on, let's say one of the lines in
My
more
email,
advanced-
my emails, I do not include the links because I give you a
Okay.
handout. Only
Okay.
the TNT SIG gives you linkable items. And that's only in the invite. All right, now we're going to get rid of that.
Did you know we moved into 2024 now, which means I now have the right to do another Linux distro tier list because, yeah, I'm limiting myself to one of these per year. And since the last one, I tried a lot of other distributions, either in a video on the channel or in my own time. And the distros I ranked last time have also evolved. So let's see how I would rank everything at the beginning of 2024 and what I would personally use and what I would pass on. But what I wouldn't pass on is this segue to our sponsor. This video is sponsored by SquareX, and if you like to browse the web privately and securely, you really should give them a shot. SquareX can be installed as a browser extension for Chromium-based browsers, and it also has a web app for any other browser. And it will give you access to a suite of disposable tools that open everything in the cloud instead of locally, so your system and your data are never at risk. With SquareX, you get a burner browser that will block ads and trackers and give you access to any geographical location you'd like, or even multiple different locations in different tabs. And everything is simply deleted when you close the window, sort of like a VPN plus tracker blocker plus incognito mode combo in one click. SquareX also will give you a disposable file viewer that lets you open files and view documents from senders you don't trust just yet, without risking your system. Nothing you open in there can access your real physical computer. And you also get a disposable email address that you can use to create accounts and subscribe to various newsletters without giving away your real address and identity. And apart from this, they have other security smart integrations that you get out of the box to make you safer online. So click the link in the description and give SquareX a shot. It's an excellent tool to make sure that your browsing stays safe and private. So obviously it is all subjective, and I decided to rank all of these distributions in terms of how likely I would be to use them for my own use case, which is content production and running a business. And everyone will have different criteria, so don't get offended if I ranked your distro lower than what you would have, and don't hesitate to let me know in the comments if you would have ranked it higher and why. So we'll have the following categories. We'll have great, as in I could absolutely recommend this with my eyes closed. We'll have good, which is I would use that distro. We'll have average, which is it's good, but it's not for me. We'll have no thanks, as in I would not run that. And we have hell no, as in I'm not touching that ever. So let's start with the big one, Ubuntu. I feel it has progressed a lot since last time. The Ubuntu team has a renewed focus on improving their implementation of GNOME, with plenty of patches to improve performance and newer additions in the form of extensions, like a tiling assistant. You know it is going to work reliably, it has tons of help online, and if an app exists on Linux, it has an Ubuntu package. But their insistence on pushing snap packages for desktop applications really irritates me, because I feel Flatpak would be a far superior solution. And also I'm not a big fan of how Canonical treats various open source projects recently, so I'm only putting this one in average. It's like last time, it's not incredible, and to use it I would have to remove Snap and reinstall some stuff, so it's not great, it's just decent. And I would place all its derivatives at the same spot because they suffer from the same problem. Linux Mint, though, I feel still deserves its place in the great category. Not only does it provide the most complete graphical experience out of the box with utilities for everything, but they also fixed most of my annoyances with it. As in, they have started work on Wayland support to future-proof their distro, and their first draft of a Wayland session is actually not bad at all. And they now have an Edge ISO with a newer kernel, so you can actually install it on recent hardware. So it is definitely still a great Linux distro, recommended for any beginner or even for advanced users. The only reason I'm not using Linux Mint as a daily driver is because I'm not a huge fan of the Cinnamon desktop for myself. Now Zorin OS is going to move up to the average category. It's not a bad distro, it looks good, it has plenty of improvements and layouts for GNOME, but for a desktop distro, it is still moving way too slow. Zorin OS 17 just came out and it's based on Ubuntu 22.04. which is going to be replaced in a few months by a new LTS. It's not a terrible choice, but with their current release schedule, you will get something that is half recent in 2025, and that's just not acceptable for a desktop in my opinion. It is not as much of a problem as it once was, because with Flatpak you can basically get recent applications even if your base is pretty old. But the desktop they use is old, and I just could not see myself sticking with that for 2 years. Elementary OS will unfortunately stay in the no thanks category for now as well. I love the distro, I love their desktop, but I just cannot use it nowadays. It's updated way too slowly, and Elementary OS 8 will bring some cool stuff. They'll finish the transition to GTK4, they'll bring a Wayland session, so it will move into the modern Linux era. But it just doesn't offer enough for me anymore today. It's not a bad distro, but as it stands right now with Elementary OS 7, it is just not for me. Now, Fedora is a distro I used for a long while as a daily driver, until very recently, and this distro I'll place in the great category. It is very stable, it is updated often, it is pushing the new Linux desktop stack with Portals, Wayland, Pipewire and Flatpak, and it's the embodiment of everything I enjoy about Linux. Constant improvements and innovation and risk-taking that pays off. And sure, it's a Red Hat thing, and Red Hat is not my favorite company right now. But as a distribution, it's one I could recommend to everyone, especially if you want to move into the present or the future of Linux. They're not afraid to drop all the things to help everyone progress, and I love that. As per Debian, I only ever used the stable version, and I will put it in average for my use case. Debian 12 was released relatively recently, and so it is not utterly outdated yet, but it will be utterly outdated by the time Debian 13 gets updated. The desktop it uses, the apps in the repos, they will all be terribly, terribly old. And for apps, it's not as much of a problem because obviously now you have Flatpak that can solve the problem, but for the desktop you use, it's just not for me. I like my stuff to get updates when the new desktops comes out, and Debian just doesn't give me that. Maybe the unstable version would be worth a shot to see if it changes my opinion. Still, Debian offers a solid experience, it's easy to use, there's plenty of documentation, and they now have proprietary firmware ready to be installed if you need it. So it's a solid distro no matter the use case. Now, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed is next, and I will put this one in the good category. It's a really good rolling release, and while my experience with SUSE is limited, they do have some really good admin tools to configure a bunch of things that other distros simply do not have a graphical user interface for. And in my testing, it was rock solid as far as rolling releases go. I could definitely see myself using it. As per OpenSUSE Leap, I'll put it in average. It's virtually the same experience as with Tumbleweed in terms of the benefits of using OpenSUSE, but it's just not interesting to me as a distribution. It's a bit too slow moving, it's a bit too enterprise focused for my own tastes. And the current way this distro works will be changed soon with the future of Leap lying with ALP, making it an image-based operating system. So it is not bad, not at all, but I just don't find it interesting or suitable for my needs. Now the good old Arch Linux will go in average for me, because I would personally not use it on my computer. But it's not because it's a bad distro, it's because it's not for me. All my experiences with Arch and Arch-based distros were cut short by issues after updating my computer, and I cannot deal with that on a daily basis. I need a system where I can just click the update button with my eyes closed, reboot, and expect everything to work when the computer comes back alive, without having to read update notes or look over various install scripts to check if they are safe or not, and Arch just does not provide that experience for me. And I understand why people love and use Arch and a bunch of its derivatives, and if you have the time to invest in making sure it's solid, it can be very, very stable. But for me, it's just not cutting it. And speaking of Arch derivatives, Manjaro I will place in the no thanks category again this year. The way it is built just doesn't make sense to me. You're getting access to the AUR, but since you're also not using the latest Arch packages, you will have issues with that, as there will be mismatches between libraries and package versions. And if you don't use the AUR on it, you're left with a rolling release that takes bad decisions, like shipping unstable versions of apps that developers don't want them to ship yet, and not testing updates that come from Arch adequately, like the grub incident. I feel there are better rolling releases to use, like Tumbleweed, for example. So yeah, it's just not for me, it's too unstable. Now, Tuxedo OS is the distro I use these days, and I will place it in good. It's a semi-rolling release, meaning you don't get major updates every 6 months like what Ubuntu does, but you're getting regular updates to the kernel, to the drivers and the apps, plus a rolling release model for the KDE Plasma desktop. It has been super stable for me. It's the best KDE distribution I have ever used, And while it is based on Ubuntu 22.04, since you're getting updates to the critical hardware support components, it's not really an issue. And the tools Tuxedo adds, like their control center, are also really good on a Tuxedo laptop, so I love using it. And the only reason why it's not in the great category is they're still basing themselves on Ubuntu LTS, and yes, they do update the hardware support components like drivers and the kernel, but the packages in the repos are pretty damn old. It's not been a big issue for me, but it could be, so I'll wait to see how fast they will rebase on 24.04 before placing this one in the great category. Now, as per PopOS, it will be in the no thanks category for me this year. It is not a bad distro. It's pretty much the same behavior as Tuxedo OS. You get updates to the drivers and the kernel, but the desktop they ship is just completely outdated. It's based on a very old GNOME version with a bunch of extensions, and the experience has not changed in 2 years, and that's just not acceptable for me. And I would expect that to change by the time 24.04 releases for PopOS, which is going to be apparently in the summer with the brand new, rewritten from scratch Cosmic desktop. But for now, installing 22.04 on my desktop or on my laptop would be a big regression in terms of workflow and performance and features. Now, Solus is a distro I expected to not even mention in that tier list, since it was pretty much dead last year. But since then, it apparently revived, and it looks like they have plans. Now, it is still going to go in hell no for me, because I cannot tell if this is a temporary revival or if it is here to stay. I need more time to see if they will repeat the mistakes of the past, and since they also want to completely change how the distro is built and works for Solus 5, I cannot place any long-term trust in them for now. When I install something, I like it to last for a year or two, and Solus just does not give me the confidence I need to reliably have that experience. So it's in hell no for me. Now, Gen 2, I will put in no thanks for my own use case. Again, I understand why people want to use it, but personally, I do not find it a compelling proposition at all. I don't want to compile any of my programs to gain 1 to 3% performance, and using the binary packages on Gen 2, why? Just use any other distro that has binary packages. So if you love Gen 2, that's cool, but the very concept is simply just not working for me at all. Now, KDE Neon will go in average. I like the rolling release model for the desktop and the rebasing on a new LTS when it's available. But also it hasn't been extremely stable the last time I tried it, and I feel that nowadays Tuxedo OS does the same job, but much better, so I just wouldn't use Neon personally. Now, Asahi Linux and Fedora Asahi are in a weird spot here. I cannot use any of these myself, but it's not because they're bad, it's because it runs on hardware I don't like. My MacBook Pro M1 will be sold soon, it's way too heavy and it lacks useful ports. And it is ARM, so there is no DaVinci Resolve on that, meaning that I can just not use these distros. But Asahi as a distro is awesome and almost feature complete, so I will put it in average because placing it lower would not really be justified. Now let's talk about NixOS. And this one will make some people grit their teeth, but it's only going in average for me, meaning I could see myself using it, but currently I don't see the point. Having a reproducible system is great, and I loved learning the syntax to configure the system. But some things were just annoying to get to work, like DaVinci Resolve, which the studio version I could never run, or NVIDIA drivers. And for my use case, there is no point, really. I don't reinstall often enough that I need a config file that would recreate my own system. And other distros are stable enough that I don't feel like I need to use something like Nix. It is a really good distro, and I loved experimenting with it, but I just don't see the point for my own use case personally. Now, Holo ISO is a weird one, because you don't use it for desktop use, it's for gaming related stuff. And for that specific use case, I will place it in great. I have recently reinstalled it on my own console, which is basically just a tower PC from Tuxedo, and this time I had nothing to configure or change. It just installed and worked perfectly right at the bat. So for my gaming needs, it's basically the Steam Deck experience on a big TV with good hardware and performance, and for that, it's wonderful. Now for more mixed gaming and desktop usage, I would place Nobara in good. It's a solid improvement over Fedora. It actually delivers better performance, the suite of tools that are pre-installed is great. The only thing I don't quite like is that it's a smaller project, and as such, I would be wary of running it as a daily driver because it's not seeing a ton of external contributions, and I am not sure I would find enough help online if I needed it. Now for Vanilla OS, I would place that in no thanks for my own use case. I like the concept of running distros in containers to get access to any package or app you want, but also I don't need that. I can already run any app on any distros these days, and it's more meant for development purposes, and that is not my use case, so I would not run Vanilla OS as my main operating system. Now for fun, I will include Chrome OS Flex, because it's basically a regular Linux distro these days with a proprietary desktop. And I will place it in hell no, because, well, it completely sucks. It lacks the most basic of features, the desktop is bare bones and performs badly, and installing anything that is not a web app requires you to use what is basically a VM, so performance is really bad. It is a bad operating system, a bad desktop, there's proprietary stuff all around, and it's also privacy invasive, so hell no for Chrome OS Flex. And as per Deepin, it's still going in hell no as well, because it has telemetry baked in, it's using a very old Debian base, and the desktop might look nice, but all of its apps are super limited. And installing anything else on top of that just breaks the unified look and feel. I would never use that distro, but if you like the desktop, the Deepin desktop, I would recommend maybe using it on another distro, because it can look really good. So that's it for all the distros I have used on my own time or on the channel, and how I would rank them for my own use case. Obviously yours might be different, so let me know where you would have placed all those distributions yourself using the same ranking system. And in the meantime, I will let you know about our sponsor. It's Tuxedo.
I'm going to stop that part. We've already heard it once. I'm going to do some beginner stuff. Is there any additional comments on this last one? I threw this in because there is more than one Linux out there. There isn't just one. And some of you are more advanced than others, and you might want to take a look at some of the others. I have two that are in the top 2 tiers of his stuff, and I have some that are in the 3rd tier, but I don't have much in the way of his bottom 2 tiers. But I have tried some of them. And one of them, he didn't like Arch. Most of my Arch experience has been good, but the way he talked about doing changes in his hardware, perhaps he changes his more than I do, so that might be a factor. I don't know, but I haven't had too much real issues using Arch bases. But Arch bases, I warn you, are what's called bleeding edge distros. That means stability problems can occur on a case-by-case basis. You could have a great experience on one distro, get an update to it, and it might become unstable. That's a realistic thing with Arch-based distros. So using it for production purposes, I have to agree with this guy that we just did, and say that it's a case-by-case basis. What are you doing with it? Most of my Arch, I do more playing with And playing to me is I experiment with it. I check things out. I try this, I try that, and see how things work. It's not usually used for production purposes. OpenSUSE, I use Gecko, which is a polished version, like Mint is a polished version of Ubuntu or Debian. And so bottom line is Gecko I prefer over OpenSUSE, and I prefer that over the Fedora and stuff like that. But some of the early distros I did use like Fedora and Red Hat, and I just found them too centric for business purposes, and even Fedora is too heavily towards a business environment. And when I say business environment, I'm talking like a good-sized company, not a small business. Now, a small business, on the other hand, might do just fine with those types of operating systems, but right now I don't have that kind of need. Debian base is pretty solid overall. The individual distros based upon Debian, like Ubuntu, and Mint is based upon Ubuntu, can lend to instability, but there's LMDE version of Linux Mint based on Debian. It's rock solid. They have a policy where they are very slow to update Debian with new things until they feel confident they have thoroughly tested it out. So in a sense, Debian is behind the times compared to a lot of other distros. So I'm trying to give you a little bit of perspective there. Now this guy here, this is ideas of switching to Linux, and we'll see how things...
So back when I started this channel, 12 years ago now, for those of you who are counting, I had this idea that I wanted to create a resource of videos to help new users, especially as they were switching from other proprietary operating systems, Windows and Mac, to use Linux and open source stuff, to showcase alternatives, as it were. And one of the key things that I've realized in these last 12 years or so is that there are so many things that I know now I wish I knew back then, and chances are that you have plenty of those as well. So today's video is about combining my ideas and you, the viewer, your ideas into the 10 best practices that we all wish we knew when we first started using Linux. So maybe you've just installed Linux, maybe you are thinking about it. Here's some tips, some best practices, some good ideas before you take the plunge. Let's get into it. All right, so these are a combination of my own thoughts as well as the comments left by the kind YouTube community and also those on Twitter about what they think the best practices are when using Linux and first starting out, what we wish we knew. So first of all, number one, pick a mainstream distro. This is something that comes as a recommendation that plenty of other Linux people on YouTube will happily tell you. When you first start out, you want to pick something that has lots of support available for it. So some of the big ones like Ubuntu and Fedora are great places to start, and or Linux Mint, Zorin. Honestly, the list of recommendations could go on, but pick a mainstream distro and then try and shape it to what your muscle memory already knows. What I mean by that is, like, how do you usually use your computer? What do you usually use it for? Try and target those problems first. Change it to the way that you already know how to work to some degree, and then you will learn the bits and pieces of what you don't know. Number two, and this one comes courtesy of UK PRL on YouTube. And his recommendation, which I definitely validate, is create a separate home partition. Now you might not get this the first time you install Linux, but if you create a separate /home partition, what you're effectively doing is separating your personal data from the partition of the hard drive, the section of the hard drive where your operating system lives. So should anything go wrong, you can always obliterate this section of the hard drive while all your personal stuff remains intact. What happens if that happens? Well, we'll get back to that very shortly. But creating a separate home partition is good practice, and it also makes backing up and taking incremental images of your personal data just that little bit easier. So create your own home partition. Number 3, make sure that you enable a firewall. Funnily enough, this doesn't usually come enabled as standard on most big distributions. However, most big distributions have a firewall installed. It's there, it's sitting there, it's available, but it's just not turned on by default. And it's just the smallest thing that you can do to protect yourself online. And enabling the firewall is as simple as opening your desktop, starting to type firewall into whatever menu you have on your distro, entering into the firewall configuration, hitting the toggle to turn it on, and then saying deny incoming connections. That is the incredibly simple version. There will be more recommendations for helpful things to do about firewalls down below and many other places in the internet. But firewall, make sure you turn it on, please. Number 4, use a VPN. Honestly, if you are thinking about making the switch from Windows or Mac, then chances are you are concerned somewhat about the amount of data that gets mined from you, the end user, from proprietary systems, be they Windows, Mac, Android, or otherwise. A VPN is honestly one of the best ways that you can protect yourself online, and also just open up a bunch of other possibilities, alternatives when it comes to what you can do online. Now, if you're going to enable a VPN, you better enable a good one, and that's where our sponsor NordVPN comes in. Now, most of you are tech savvy enough to not need me to sing the praises of how important a good VPN is, but NordVPN is seriously one of the fastest VPNs that you can get your hands on today. Like, they have approaching 6,000 servers in 59 different countries. So no matter where you are on planet Earth, you can get a secure internet connection that is able to mask your true location and identity on the global internet. And I think that is a really underrated tool to be able to use. Now, not only that, like, you get a bunch of fantastic tech working behind this stuff to make your internet connection great, but also when it comes to like the small things, like, I don't know, not getting your credit card data sifted at a public Wi-Fi connection, or I don't know, enjoying the childhood TV shows that you grew up with and you might want to show your little kids, except it's only available to stream in the UK and in the US. I'm sure you can't think of any possible examples. The Reboot, by the way, I think is pretty underrated. And with really simple apps that you can literally go download and install on any platform, including Linux and whatever phone you happen to be using, you can load it up on up to 6 devices and get your entire internet situation sorted. Now you, the Infinitely Galactic viewer, get access to a stonkingly great NordVPN deal in the description box below, or you can go to www.nordvpn.com/infinitelygalactic. It's probably easy to click the link because that's a mouthful. And you're going to get a great price on a 2-year plan, and you're going to get 4 months free just chucked in. And it's entirely risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee. But honestly, once you taste the convenience of NordVPN and the opportunities and peace of mind it brings, chances are you're probably not going to look back. So, link in the description, check it out, and thanks to NordVPN for the ongoing support of this channel. Number 5, backup. Shout out to Alvaro Z and the other M for their explanations and recommendations here, but all of us wish somebody told us the importance of backing up, especially when you're starting out in Linux. And there's a few different ways or things you need to be aware of with backing up as well. You need to be able to back up the system, like with Timeshift or Snapper or the BTRFS file system, and you can look around for how to do that. Timeshift is the easiest, so figure that one out first. And also your personal stuff. And I mean, cloud storage can be great here. Also, the Ubuntu's built-in backup tool, or Deja Dupe if you're looking for it on other software stores, are great starts to back up your own personal data. But get a solid backup regime in place, because at some point something's going to go wrong, whether it's your fault or not. And yeah, you don't want to lose stuff. Number 6, try and centralize where you're getting your software from. Because it's Linux, there are 5 billion ways of installing software on your distro, but try and keep it all under the one system and try and figure out something that's relatively secure. So, where possible, stick to native packages in your distro's repository. Where that fails, move on to sandboxed package formats, things like Flatpak and Snap. Beyond that, move on to third-party debs or third-party repositories. And beyond that, if you're really stuck, which I don't see why you would be at this point, but then resort to your random runtime files and stuff like that. But honestly, those top 3 should be your priority. And there's a bunch of reasons for this, but security is the main one. You don't want to be grabbing random software from random places on the internet. It's just not good practice. Number 7, the terminal is your friend. It's probably one of the most intimidating parts of learning Linux is feeling like you have to learn how to use the terminal. Well, the truth is nowadays you really don't, but you should because it's better. At least that's what we all came to realize a few weeks, months, years into this thing. And a few notes on this. First of all, try to learn your distro's package management commands on the command line first. Usually these are pretty easy to get your head around, whether that is through apt or DNF or pacman or whatever it is. Learning those commands is a great gateway to be able to understand how commands, broadly speaking, work. Also, don't copy and paste commands from random posts on the internet. Bad practice. First, make sure that you type them out and do a bit of research as to what those basic commands seem to be doing. Because you don't just want to slap something that then downloads something to your computer and makes a mess of things. So, do your research, type those commands in yourself. You'll be learning plenty in the process. Number 8, once you have your distro sorted, leave it alone. Seriously, it's tempting, very tempting, to be constantly hosing your system, reinstalling when there's something greener on the horizon. Because unfortunately with Linux, there just is always new stuff on the horizon. But here's my recommendation. I would suggest that, like we suggested back in number 2, where you have a separate home partition, if your hard drive is big enough, or if you only have one drive, you can split it up into 2 bits. Have like your work distro, where you set it, forget it, you set it up the way you like it and leave it alone. And then you can have kind of like your experimentation distro, or you could just use virtual machines. That's good too. But whatever you do, once you get things working just the way you like it, don't go and blow it all up. It's tempting, I know. Just try not to. Number 9, we're kind of getting deep in the weeds here, but setting up fonts in your system that can help with document compatibility is actually one of those really underrated things that is really going to help. When somebody sends you a Word document and it's just full of Calibri font, it's going to end up looking whack when you compare the formatting with when you open it up in LibreOffice, for example. And this can be one of those things that leads to people just immediately saying LibreOffice sucks, when really it's just the fonts are incompatible. So shout out to Zorin OS, because of the fact they're working on bringing in fonts that are metric compatible. There's some suggestions here on the screen of some of the fonts that can be good drop-in replacements for some of the trickier Microsoft fonts to replicate. And you can see the compatibility here maps a whole lot better with Office, Microsoft Office documents than ones that are just available by default in the distro. So definitely go and install the MS Core fonts for all of those boring ones like Times New Roman and Arial, and then go and get those metric compatible fonts. It'll make your compatibility situation so much better. And shout out to Meher Fadness for that suggestion. And number 10, final concluding thoughts here. First of all, Agent Smith recommends don't expect everything to work, and no truer advice could ever be said about open source software in general, but especially when you're getting started in the Linux world. Also, Roadrunner backs it up with saying don't quit if you can't figure it out in the first 5 minutes. Be patient, learn some things, Google some stuff. And from me, don't forget to enjoy the process. Have some fun with this thing. You have almost total control over it. You can make it do whatever you want. So welcome to the world of opportunity and alternatives. 10 things that we wish we all knew when we started using Linux. See you all in the next one.
Any comments on this one? I like number 9, especially since I've done the Microsoft fonts, but also he came up with these new fonts I hadn't heard about anywhere else.
Yeah, about fonts. LibreOffice is getting more and more of the compatible fonts.
Understood.
With every iteration, it gets better. But you do owe it to yourself to put in the non-free Microsoft package.
Yeah. It makes a big difference in what you see if somebody created a document on a Microsoft system and you're looking at it on a Linux system in, say, LibreOffice or OpenOffice, et cetera, and without the compatible fonts in your system right off the bat, your document that you're looking at is going to look like garbage. And quite often you get real frustrated. Well, the first time that I came across that, it was my own document opened up on LibreOffice without the Microsoft fonts. And I lost it, so to speak. I ended up redoing almost the entire document before I finally found out, oh, it's because the fonts aren't compatible. Here's how you do it. You install, and you can get a lot of these fonts on the software manager. So you can download them directly in, and it'll take care of a lot of problems. Like Bob said, LibreOffice is getting better and better on compatible fonts. But these micro ones that Zorin has developed sound quite interesting, and there's only 5 of them right now. So I'm going to be looking into that. Anybody else got anything?
And just
On the
one more.
fonts, we used to run
One at a time.
We used to run into that a lot with designers and manuals or designers and packaging, where they would find some really oddball font and put it into packaging or put it into the manuals, and then we'd get it with our engineers and nothing would look right. And it finally got to the point where we said, you're not going to use custom fonts, you're going to use just the Microsoft suite so that we have compatibility across the whole country and around the world.
That's absolutely true. I remember those days myself, so I can empathize with what you're saying there. But reality is, when you're doing the stuff on your own system, you don't always stop and think, if I share this with somebody else, are they going to have the same experience that I had creating it? If it's not going to fly, then you're, especially in a business environment, good luck. All right, I'm going to move on to another new one. Oops. And this one looks pretty interesting too.
Is switching to Linux from Windows the right move for you? So before you make any decisions, I'm going to show you what you get when you set up your Linux system for the first time and what you need to do to get up and running as quickly as possible. And I will also tell you who absolutely should not be switching over to Linux. So let's start with the hardware. And this is not really a thing in Linux, as it runs on virtually any hardware. If you're running Windows now, odds are pretty darn good that Linux will work for you. So no need to spend money on new hardware, and of course the software is free as well. Now you have to select the Linux distribution. You want something that is a nice graphical interface where you can use your mouse and not have to learn a bunch of commands. You want something that closely resembles Windows so you can start working with the least amount of frustrations. But if you search which is the best Linux distro for beginners, man, you're gonna be bombarded by millions of opinions of which is the best. And honestly, it doesn't really matter when you're just dipping your toes in to see what this is all about. I mean, I like Pop! OS, which is very easy to use and has a very window-ish feel to it. I also like Mint for the exact same reason. The one I'm going to go with is Zorin OS. But with all of these, you can try them without removing Windows, so you can decide which one you like. They all have great tutorials on how to install them. Just simply follow them along, but essentially the process is the same. Once you boot into your chosen Linux system, you will have the options to try it or to install it. If you click on try it, you can click around and see what it's got to offer and see which one is more intuitive for you. When you try it, it doesn't actually touch your Windows or your data. So try them all, pick your favorite, and then go ahead and install it. And what's great is that there are loads of tutorials on YouTube on how to install your chosen Linux distro, and you can choose if you want a dual boot system, so you still have the option to have Windows on the one drive and then Linux on the other drive. So let's dive into Zorin OS. So this is what the environment looks like. Pretty much familiar, right? There's a start button on the left hand side with all your menu options. Next to it, there's something called Workspaces, which allows you to work in different environments. Then you got the Firefox, which is your web browser. Then you got your files, which is, well, basically where you're going to keep all your files, very much like File Manager that we have on Windows. All right, let's close that down. Next up, we've got your software, which is essentially your store for all your software, like the App Store, Workspaces, which allows you to work in different environments. Then you got the Firefox, which is your web browser. Then you got your files, which is, well, basically where you're going to keep all your files, very much like File Manager that we have on Windows. All right, let's close that down. Next up, we've got your software, which is essentially your store for all your software, like the App Store on our mobile phones, like the Microsoft Store on Windows. And of course, you can find all the utilities and all the apps and all the software that you possibly could need right here. Some is already pre-installed and you can uninstall them if you don't like them. And there's an option for very quick updates to see which of the apps actually need an update. And a simple click just does it for you. Continuing a little tour on the right hand side at the bottom, here you see the type of connection that you have, Bluetooth, your night light. You can enable or disable them with a simple click of a button. You can even have an option to capture things on your screen, and it can either be a static image or a little video clip. Next to it is the settings sign, which we'll get into it. Here is the lock icon, which basically means you can lock your computer and then you can sign back in when you're ready. All right, let's put our password in and let's carry on. And then on the very last option, you got the option to power your system down. And let's just go back to the start button. And here you can see things are already grouped together under certain categories. This happens to be your accessory categories. If you go back, you can go through each one of them and see what's actually pre-installed and ready for you to go. On the right-hand side of that little menu, here is where you see little personalization options, and you can click onto them. And again, everything is like Windows. Everything you can click, you can change. Now let's right click on the start button and then let's go into settings. So if this sounds familiar, well, it should, because Windows does the same thing. And here is where you'll find everything that you need in order to set up your machine. I'm going through the settings, things like Bluetooth. You can add more devices, changing the background. You can just go down this list and customize your machine as you want it to be. So far, so easy. Now, let's install something and see how that goes. Okay, so fire up Firefox, and I like Chrome. So I'm going to go to the Chrome website, and I'm going to click on the download Chrome, and let's see what it does. Oh, look, it recognized Chrome for Linux, and that's exactly what we want. So we click on accept and install and go through the normal motions. Once it's on our computer, we can simply open it up, and then it opens up this little screen saying choose an application to open the .deb file. And now we have a bunch of options: software install, archive manager, or install Linux application. I'm just going to choose install Linux application. The screen pops up and I simply click on install. Now with Linux security, you will have to put in your super user password when you do things that changes the system, like installing a new application. That's good security. It's like the administrator password on Windows. And there we go. There is your Chrome installed. And now what we're going to do is I want to pin this to my taskbar. So I'm going to unpin Firefox because I don't need to use that. I'm then going to go to the internet section. There's my Google Chrome. Right click on that. And then I select the option to pin to dash. So now I learned that dash is the equivalent of your Windows taskbar. All right, so that was pretty straightforward. So next up, what about email? Now, I use Microsoft Outlook. I don't use Gmail as my primary email. So let's see what Zorin has to offer. Now, it does come pre-installed with Evolution, which is like the Outlook equivalent. Okay, so let's click on the Zorin icon and let's type there Evolution. So it does the good old search thing. There is Evolution right there. Now, it's the first time that I'm installing it and using it, so I need to give it the information that it needs, like my name, the service that it's connecting to, the organization name, all the things that your normal Outlook client would need, or any email client that you set up on your phone. Okay, and basically, it's a regular email application. Your inbox, your outbox, your sent items. And of course, to send a new mail, you press the new mail button and you can address it. You can attach a file and automatically opens up into your home folder, which is where your files are all kept. All pretty standard stuff. And as we did before, type Evolution. There it is. There's a whole bunch of shortcuts, but the one we want is pin to dash. And there we go. Our system is ready to rock and roll. Okay, now we're getting emails. Now what about Word and PowerPoint and Excel and PDFs and JPEG files? Well, obviously we're going to need to use our data when we move it across from Windows to Linux. So let's check those out next. Right, I got a bunch of files on a USB stick. As soon as I connect to it, there it is. It recognizes that it's there. Now I can go to my file manager at the bottom, click on that. Now I'll go click on the USB flash drive, and here are all the files that I've just copied across from my Windows machine. I select them all, right click and copy. Then I go to my home folder, go to my documents, and I simply paste them in there. Copy and paste works perfectly well here as well. So do these files actually open? Well, let's go try each one. So let's try with the Word document. Oh, LibreOffice opens, and because that's already pre-installed on Zorin OS. And this looks awfully familiar again. I keep referring back to it, the fact that it's so similar to what we're used to. We shouldn't really be afraid of this. Look how close it is. Oh, I misspelled something. I need to add something to the dictionary. Right click, add to dictionary, right click, spell check. Everything that we're used to, and it just works and opens well. Right, let's try the next one. This one is a PDF. So let's maximize it. So we take the entire screen. That's a property valuation on some property. PDF files works just well. Hasn't lost the formatting. It's all there exactly how you expect. Close that down. What about an Excel document? Yep, LibreOffice opens it, and there it is. Looks exactly the same as Excel. Did I mention that LibreOffice comes pre-installed and you don't have to pay for it either? I mean, there's no ads as far as I can see. It's just there, so why not use it? Okay, let's close down Excel. Next up, we got 2 JPEG files. Can you cycle between them as you normally would? Yep, that works perfectly fine as well. And what else have we got? Now we've got a PowerPoint. Does that work perfectly fine? Or, yep, there it is. It even looks exactly the same. Things are where they're supposed to be. So you gotta admit, it's pretty awesome. So Linux isn't so scary after all. I mean, when you're getting started, you don't have to jump into terminal and learn all these new commands. You can easily get up and running pretty much from the moment you install it. And everything is very Windows-like. You can go through the menus and enable and disable stuff so your computer works just the way you want it to. But before you decide, here are some warnings. If you have loads of complicated Office apps with complicated macros, you're really going to struggle. If you have any company apps or things that only work on Windows, like you have hardware peripherals that plug into your computer, those may not work as those drivers may not have Linux compatibility. You could try using something like Wine or Bottles, which are systems that kind of have Windows apps to work on Linux. Let me know if you want to see a video about that. Now, gamers, you're going to struggle too. Now, Linux has come a long way for gamers, but it's still not perfect. I am personally not a gamer, so for me, it's not an issue, but I thought I would mention that in case you are. Oh, and contrary to popular belief and those wonderful YouTube comments, Linux is not problem-free. It's not like you will set up your Linux system and never have any issues. Just like any operating system, issues do pop up. So plan on investing some time learning. It isn't Windows, it's a brand new operating system. The terminal commands, you're going to have to get into them at some point. but Linux is absolutely usable to get you working very quickly right from the beginning with very little learning. So, if you don't want to keep running Windows or have hardware that simply cannot take Windows 11 or Windows 12, or are just tired of Microsoft doing whatever they want to with their updates and their ads and AI and all that privacy stuff in Windows, then perhaps it's time to give Linux a real shot. Now remember, you are going to need to back up your data on your Windows computer so that you have the ability to use it on your Linux computer. So I've got a video right here on how to back stuff up. Give the video a quick like before you head out, and I will see you in this video. Let's go.
Okay, I'm going to stop that there. I want to bring up a couple things that he brought up. He put an icon.
Jim, if you're talking, you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you. I have cats, and they were having an argument. Anyway, bottom line is there are a couple items that he brought up I want to address. One of them is he was putting in the start menu a copy of the Chrome OS browser, and it said dashboard or dash. And most Linux distros call that a panel versus Windows calls it taskbar. All three terms are about the same piece down at the bottom of your window where all your quick launches, icons, and applications are located at. When it comes to the differences and changes, you do have to be very patient. It is a learning curve, and you're going to stumble. And when he says, this is one of the few guys that will tell you the truth, all OSs, you ought to see all the people with Microsoft Windows. I don't care what version, that constantly have lots of problems. A lot of it has to do with the fact Windows computers have a great deal of flexibility in them because so many different manufacturers create them, and they don't always follow to the letter Microsoft's recommendations, and that's where some of the problems can arise. And unlike Apple's machines like the Macs, those are made by Apple to their specification, and they beat up on the Hackintosh crowd out there that tries to give you the ability to run macOS on a ordinary Windows machine. And those days may be coming to an end soon, I found out. So I'm bringing this up right now. All the OSs always have bugs. Why? Human beings are not perfect. Human beings make errors. And there isn't one person making most of the software. Most of the software is made by teams of people, and they all have different characteristics. And I speak as a programmer in my past. So bottom line is, I can change a program that somebody else or several other people did, and I can cause a problem without realizing it. And nobody has, except for Apple, all the necessary hardware to test out on every single computer ever built with any configuration of each and every individual machine. Does anybody else have any comments?
I can remember in history, going back to Windows 95, where everybody was every 6 months was playing around with hardware, and you would just be killed with the blue screens because the drivers would screw with each other, and they said Windows 95 was no good. I had a 95 machine in the lab that went for 7 years continuous in production with no hiccups because we never changed the hardware.
Right. And that's one of the keys. But the thing is, from time to time, if you don't have a machine where all the stuff is soldered onto the motherboard, like a NUX as an example can be, then you have a case where some of the hardware can be changed. As an example, especially in most NUXes, you can change the memory modules. So if you got a machine that originally had 8 gigs of memory, you can change that to 16 gigs. And in some of them, you can go all the way to 64 gigs. But the CPU chip in a NUX is soldered on. You can't change it. In the minis that I use, they are socketed chips still. So within the same generation, if I bought a machine with an i3, I can change it to the i5 or the i7 chip, just as long as I keep the version with the right wattage. Minis come in a 35 watt and a 65 watt. There are a lot of desktop CPUs that exceed 65 watts. You can't use those under any circumstance. You'd fry the machine. But I can. I have machines here that have 35 watt. The processor ends with a T, as in Tom. Whereas on the 65 watters, these are standard 65 watt chips that you can find in older laptops and in desktops. And I can get damn good performance out of my systems by just a simple hardware upgrade. And as yet, I don't fall into the trap of hardware incompatibility as I'm upgrading the operating system, whether it's Windows or Linux. I haven't had an issue yet. But there are hardware updates that can really cause problems. Printers is another area. Some printers will only work with a Windows system, and you may never be able to get them to work on a Linux system. But thankfully, the majority will work with Linux, and a lot of the manufacturers will even provide you Linux-based drivers for your printer. Anybody else got anything?
So on the printers, I have been a laser guy since probably 1995 because I found back when I was in the Chicago area, I could go to the computer shows and I could get an HP laser that was pulled out of a business for like $75. And that would run when I was in school for 2 or 3 years on the cartridge that was in it, and I didn't have any problems.
I agree with you 100%. Because
Okay,
I'm on lasers too. I started off with inkjets, and I found that to be a bloody nightmare. So I went to lasers. I've got 5. 2 are color. 3 are black and white only. They're HP, Brother, and Dell printers, and they're all laser.
I used to be an HP house for my printers. Now I'm a Brother house, and when I brought a new one back from the shop, and I put it on the network, and thinking I was going to have a problem getting it on the Linux box. The first time I hooked up to the network with the Linux box, it just popped up in the printer list.
Yes, I've had that same experience.
So a good brand name that's a universal name is a big savior. Listen to that, James.
Okay.
And the brothers are cheap. The brothers are relatively cheap, even the color ones.
Yeah. And you can get all-in-ones that will have a flatbed scanner at least. And if you get into the MFC versions, you might get a automatic scanner, multi-page type.
So I've got one of mine is a flatbed scanner with an automatic, and it's black and white, and then the other one is just a straight color, but both of them are duplexes.
Yeah.
So they suck the paper back in and do the other side of the paper, which saves your paper a whole lot.
And offhand, with inkjets, they usually run, though some have gotten much better in not running if they get damp, whereas lasers never do have that issue.
And the cartridges don't dry up.
Right. That's another big one. But they do consume more electricity. Never plug a laser printer into a UPS or a surge strip. The heating element of lasers will ruin the surge protection devices in them. You got to plug a laser straight into a regular wall outlet. Okay, I'm going to move on to another one.
What you guys, got another video here for you. Today we're taking a look at what Windows users need to know before you jump ship to Linux and leave Windows behind. Now, quite a few people have left Windows and they've moved over to Linux, and I'm going to give you some of the things to watch out for before you make that final leap. So let's talk about number one first, which is Windows is not like Linux, or Linux is not like Windows, whatever way you want to put it. They are two completely different operating systems and they work in a different way. So if you're looking for an operating system in Linux or a distro in Linux that is going to look and feel like Windows, then you might be mistaken and jump ship to an operating system that you think is going to act and feel like Windows, when really it's nothing like Windows whatsoever. You are going to need to learn a completely different new operating system because it doesn't work in the same way as Windows does. That is the first thing that you need to understand. Okay, let's move on to number two, which is programs. A lot of the programs that you're used to using on Windows are just not going to work on Linux, and that's just the way it is. Now, there is workarounds where you can use Wine and things like that, or virtual machines, to get things working inside Linux, but again, if you're already thinking about ways to get that working on Linux, then maybe don't jump to Linux in the first place. That's my opinion. Linux has come on leaps and bounds over the years, but some programs like Adobe products just cannot be installed in that way. You can use the cloud-based versions, which are having to go through Wine and things like that. But if you're looking for installing programs, it's not going to work the way it does on Windows. So you have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get it to work. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't alternatives out there which are pretty good, like GIMP and LibreOffice. If you're using these applications, then these are not industry standard applications, which means a lot of companies are not hiring GIMP specialists. They're hiring people that are trained in Photoshop and other Adobe products. So bear that in mind if you're putting all your time and energy into learning something like that and expecting it to carry you somewhere in the IT world, because it's just not. Okay, so let's talk about the next one, which is hardware. So Windows is blessed with having lots of support for all different types of hardware. The manufacturers that create that hardware release drivers for that hardware and then release it to all the Windows users. Now, unfortunately, because Linux is Linux, they don't get that privilege, and sometimes some hardware manufacturers just don't release the drivers for a Linux operating system, and that can be a bit problematic. that means it might not work correctly. Now, there might be a workaround that you can find online to get it working, but unfortunately, Linux is not the problem here. It's the hardware manufacturers that release this hardware that don't release drivers for that particular hardware, and it just doesn't work. Moving on to number 4, and that is things will break on Linux just like any other OS. As much as all of these Linux fanboys will tell you in the comments section, just use Linux, it does break, and you're going to have to be patient and learn how to fix things, because you may get a piece of hardware that's not working correctly, or there might be some other little issue with it, or you just may have a major problem with it. It's going to break at some point, and it just does, like every other operating system. So the only thing I can say is use their website, use their community, because it is community based, and you can try to get some help there. But you might not find it as helpful as what you would get on the Windows side of things. There's a lot of people that use Windows compared to Linux, and it just seems to be a lot more answers out there to fix a lot of problems compared to what Linux is. And what I've found is the Linux users are quite arrogant, and this pushes people away from the platform, in my opinion. They have this elitist attitude, and this is normally coming from recent converts from Windows to Linux, and you generally get a lot of bad behavior in comment sections of YouTube videos, of Windows videos and things like that. And I think they think that they are special, and now they're drawing people to Linux by being like that, when really you're just pushing people away. Now, also the way you install your applications in the package manager here, you can go and open this up and open up the command center here and basically download the applications straight onto the system. You can see here there's a big list of them here. You can do a search, you can search by all, or you can search for must-have apps or hot apps, and you can search for these and just click on install, and it will go off and download these and install them onto the actual operating system, which is a really nice feature for Linux. So this is a different experience compared to what you're going to get on Windows. The same thing can be said for updates for the operating system as well. Now, these can also be downloaded in the terminal as well, but basically this makes it a lot easier for installing applications. Now, moving on to the next biggest question, which is going to be gaming. Can it replace your Windows-based system to play all your favorite games without any problems at all? And the short answer to that is no, it can't. But they have come on leaps and bounds, and you can play games on Linux, and over 80% of games can be played on Linux, apparently, according to their stats. And, in my personal opinion, if you're looking for a operating system to replace a Windows gaming system, then don't bother replacing it with Linux, because it's not quite there yet, and you might get the odd issue with your particular system. You can see here some people are having issues, and some people putting the thumbs up and saying they're having no problems whatsoever. So again, the sort of jury's out a little bit on the gaming front. I think it has come on quite a lot, but will it be a trouble-free experience for you? Probably not. And if you're looking for a system to replace Windows altogether for an out-and-out gaming system, then the answer to that is probably not just yet. Now, the problem is not with Linux. It's to do with, say, anti-cheats and other things like that that are causing problems with some games. So bear that in mind. If you're looking for trouble-free gaming on every single game on the platform, then you're not going to get it. That's not to bash Linux in any way, shape or form, because I think it's come on quite a lot on the gaming side of things, but it's just not there just yet for replacing Windows as an out-and-out gaming system, in my personal opinion. So let me finish off by just saying this, with these couple of simple things to remember before you make the change. If there is any type of software or game that you need to play or you need to use for any particular reason, and you can't drop it, and it's not on Linux, then don't switch, because you are going to be very disappointed and you are not going to be able to adapt. You have to learn to adapt to Linux operating system, and you have to learn to adapt with the software that's available on there. And there is tons of software on Linux, and you're just going to have to get used to a different operating system and the way it works. It's that simple. The other thing that you're going to have to learn is patience and time to learn this new operating system, because it's not like Windows whatsoever. and you will need to start learning new things. And if you're one of these people that don't have the patience and you don't want to learn new software and new things about a new operating system, then maybe Linux is not for you. You just have to accept the fact that it's going to be a process and it's going to take time to get comfortable with this new operating system and the software that this operating system has to offer. And you can't keep comparing it with Windows because it's not the same. So all you need to do now is choose the distro of your choice and use it. And there's plenty of them to choose from, believe you me. And again, if you start looking online, what is the best distro to use, you're going to see a lot of conflicting information which will confuse you. Just choose the one you like, the look of, and go with it and start using it. It's that simple. It's completely free, and again, you can install it on your system, and if you don't like it, you can always go back to Windows, or you can choose another flavor of Linux. There's plenty of them to choose from. If you have any other questions online, you can always jump in the Discord server and ask some questions on there, or leave a comment down below. There might be some Linux people down there that will be happy to answer your questions. My name has been Brian from briteccomputers.co.uk. Just want to say a quick shout out to all my YouTube members who join my YouTube members.
Okay, we're going to get out of that one. Any comments?
You brought up some good points.
Oh, a lot of these bring up good points, and some of these points that they bring up are not candy coating the distro that they're promoting as being the latest, greatest thing since sliced cheese. So they're giving you some real facts that might turn some people off, but I think it's better to know some of these things up front than to find out after the fact. And if you burned your bridges, like say James automatically installed Linux on his one desktop, he's going to be very, very put out having to try and reinstall Windows and get it set up the way it was, unless he's got a good solid image backup and knows how to restore. And that's bottom line. I'm going to try one more video here, and we'll probably give you the handout and not much else tonight.
In this video, I'm going over the things that I wish I knew earlier before switching to Linux as a lifetime Windows user. So there's going to be 6 main points that I'm going to make in this video. The first being, Linux is fundamentally different than Windows. The best example of this is when I first came on Linux, I was constantly going to the website of the software that I wanted and seeing if I could download a package from them to install it on Linux. It's such a simple thing, but every Linux distribution has a package manager built in. And that package manager is just as simple, hey, install XYZ package, and then it installs it. Simple, fast, secure, just so much better than how it's done on Windows, but it takes a little bit of retweaking your mindset to really grasp this idea. Another thing where it's fundamentally different is everything can be customized. You don't like the file explorer in your Linux install? No problem, change it. You don't like the way your desktop works? Change it. You don't like your browser and all these other things? You just change it. Where in Windows, you're pretty much stuck with how those menus operate, how the system settings and everything appears. All these things are already baked into Windows and are very static. You can't change them. Well, pretty much everything in Linux is dynamic, and you can change at will. So that brings us to point 2. The distribution doesn't matter. The only thing a distribution is different package managers, different ways to installing those apps I mentioned in the first point. And it's a starting place of how your desktop environment operates. So sometimes you get like a KDE version of Manjaro, it's an Arch-based system, and all these other things. Well, that just operates differently than, let's say, an Ubuntu or a Linux Mint. Those things just look different and feel different out of the box. However, I can make both function almost identical to each other. The only thing that's different is how you install packages and the out-of-box look and feel. So again, it kind of brings us back to point one. You can customize Linux however it is. It's just sometimes it's a little more effort that goes into that customization. So when I say Linux distributions don't matter, well, they really don't. It's just a matter of how much work do you want to put in to get it to where you fit as a user. As me as a user, it just doesn't matter. I customize my Linux install. There's no distribution out there that I'm like, oh, I have to have this or that. I'm just like, hey, I understand it. But as someone new coming into the environment, I highly recommend like Linux Mint. It has more of that Windows look and feel out of the box, so you won't be quite as lost. But just know it is the customization of Linux that makes it so powerful. And don't think that you're stuck on some specific distribution, because every distribution has its limits, and there's things about every distribution I like and dislike. So don't think that one distribution is king and you have to install that one and that's the best one, because there's a distribution out there for everybody. Number 3, there's a lot of misinformation about Linux in the community and just in general. One, in any old forums, there's a lot of bad how-to guides just because many of those steps have changed over the years and they're just badly explained. A lot of times I've noticed on many guides that I follow that experts or people that put together those guides just omit certain basic features because they figure everyone should know that if they're using Linux. So just understand, if you're looking at base old forums, there's a lot of bad how-to guides just because many of those steps have changed over the years and they're just badly explained. A lot of times I've noticed on many guides that I follow that experts or people that put together those guides just omit certain basic features because they figure everyone should know that if they're using Linux. So just understand, if you're looking at basic forums and other things like that that are outside of the mainstream, some of those guides, if they're 2, 3, or more years old, they're not going to be very relevant anymore. Point 4, there are some great communities in Linux. However, you can't just go post on any old forum, otherwise you may be ridiculed. So I highly recommend getting that if they're using Linux. So just understand, if you're looking at basic forums and other things like that that are outside of the mainstream, some of those guides, if they're 2, 3, or more years old, they're not going to be very relevant anymore. Point 4, there is some great communities in Linux. However, you can't just go post on any old forum, otherwise you may be ridiculed. So I highly recommend getting on Reddit. There's some great subreddits out there, and I'm going to put in the link description below that you can click on and check out. Linux for Noobs, Linux Questions, and then I also have my own Chris Titus Tech that you can check out and ask any question you want. It's a safe space, so to speak, to where if you're new, don't feel like, hey, I can't ask this question because it's too much of a noob question. Because pretty much any of these subreddits, you can ask anything you want and you'll get a good answer. Point 5, Linux has some unique personalities. And I mean this as a way of saying there's some experts out there that just feel like everyone should know everything about Linux when they first get to it. And that's kind of the feeling I got when I first came to Linux desktop. I was like, this is different. And this is a very vocal minority, mind you. But it's just something that kind of turns off a lot of newbie Linux users. And it's, you'll get trolled. You'll see this command up here. You'll also get some people that'll ridicule you because you don't understand how to pronunciate certain terms like GNOME, or instead of saying GNOME, or Debian, you say Debian, you say OpenSUSE instead of OpenSUSE. There's the, hey, I use Linux, therefore I'm better than you, and I know it. All these things kind of play into that whole obscure or unique personalities of Linux. You get that every once in a while, but it's, as more of the masses move to Linux, this is becoming less and less of a thing. Just know you still run into little pockets where I see this type of thing. But overall, just be prepared for a little taste of that when you get into the Linux community as a whole. However, a lot of these people have moved on or have become drowned out by the masses and people that have come into Linux. I know I'm a vocal majority, I'd say, that ridicule these people just because there's no place for them. They're discouraging people from adopting Linux, and just overall, just bad personalities that, I wish they'd just disappear from public life as far as Linux goes. And as a most part, they have become far less prevalent than they were 5 years ago. Like, I did try and jump on Linux desktop 5 years ago, and it's not nearly the place it was today. And they were just everywhere, it seemed. Anytime I asked a question, there was always some kind of snarky response. But a lot of that has disappeared, and we've seen so much of these communities pop up that supports new users. So that's why I kind of brought up in the prior point that don't worry about those users. Stick to these subreddits and also the main forums, like Ubuntu's main forums, Linux Mint's forums. Those are some great forums where you pretty much can ask anything as well. And the last and probably the best point about Linux is everything is free and open. So on Windows, when I first came here, I was like, oh man, this is cool. I got a bunch of freeware. And then immediately I almost got a response from about 10 people saying, this isn't freeware. It's free and open. It's called FOSS. Free and open software. What that means is on Windows, when someone gave something free, they basically give out a taste of their free software, and then once everyone got hooked to it, they'd switch to more of a commercialized product, now charging for it, because they never released the source code or the thing that made that product what it is. Well, on Linux, everything starts open source and free for the most part. And if someone tries to do that, well, they just say, okay, well, no problem. And someone forks that project and it just keeps being open and free. So as far as products coming into the space and charging a whole bunch of money like you see in like Mac's ecosystem or Windows ecosystem, it just doesn't really happen that much in Linux, because almost everything I do on a day-to-day basis, whether it's video editing, photo editing, any of these things can be done on Linux using free and open software. And everything else that I've wanted to do on Linux, the only thing I've really been paying for in the last 5 months of Linux desktop usage is games. There's certain games that I've been playing, and most of them are actually Windows-based games that I'm playing on Linux, so I guess you can't even knock them for that either. So this is probably the most empowering thing, is being able to just say, hey, I want to learn something, I want to go do this. I don't have any of the software. Well, no problem. There's freeware equivalents, or I caught myself again, and see, I still haven't broken myself of some of these habits. There's free and open software to do that specific thing, which is just incredible. That's the greatest thing about Linux. And those were my 6 things I wish I knew before coming to Linux, because it would have saved me some heartache, some issues as far as common conceptions. I really didn't know what I was getting into. Even with these 6 things, there's about 20 different things probably I forgot to mention in this video. Let me know in the comments what I missed. And if you'd like to support videos like this one, consider visiting me on Patreon, and I'll see you in the next video.
Okay.
In this video...
All right. I'm going to put into the chat. Hang loose for a minute here. I've got a odd issue I didn't have before. Okay. Now. Yeah, well, drop dead. Anybody got any comments further while I try and get control of mine back? I got apparently a browser problem. And I just took care of that. So go ahead if you got any comments. Speak up now or forever hold your peace.
Yeah, I like where he said that the distribution didn't matter, because it's what you do with Linux, not so much the distribution. The distribution controls the look and feel, but they all do about the same thing. It's whether you're running a word processing or what application you're running, and that's what's important, at least to me.
I think it's true of whatever user you got, whatever distro you got. It's what you do with it, not necessarily how it looks different from, say, things like Windows application that basically does the same thing. Oh, you're gonna be one of these. Okay. How did I end up there? Go home. Oh, you are going to give me a heartache. What the heck is this stupid thing doing? There we go. Finally. Whoops. Wrong one. Back up. Hit the wrong one. Okay. Document should be out there in the chat in a minute. It's going out there now. And if you're new to trying to download stuff, go at the bottom of the Zoom, click on chat. It'll open a panel on your right side of the screen, and there is out there now, I see a document. It says May Linux SIG article, cut off the S. It's got a little green dot. Click on that little green dot. It'll download the document into your system, and you can, it has the titles and the URL links for all the videos and at least 9 read type articles in there. I also see in the chat, nobody put any suggestions for future things we should try and cover in Linux. You're not helping out. Now, by the way, it's I got 9:13. We start the meeting at least 10 minutes after 7 because we wait to see if people will show up late, and frequently they do. So us going past 9 o'clock is fairly normal.
That's true.
So nobody wants to volunteer ideas for what we should try and cover as a topic somewhere down the road. Gee, that means everybody's doing absolutely everything they ever wanted to do on a computer and don't need to know about anything they didn't know about, like what Bob Premick brought up at the beginning of the meeting. That's a new one.
Well,
We
I
don't
do
know
run
what we
into.
don't know.
You don't know what you don't know.
You usually have ideas of genres of applications you like to get into. So you put the genre and any program you're already using. And it can be a Windows-based program, and we can try and see if we can find an alternative that does a good job under Linux. And you got to remember, more and more software that you're running on Windows happens to have originated in Linux. And it's cross-platform to Windows, and sometimes it's also cross-platform to macOS. So you got to understand. Also, there's a fair amount of Windows software that's now showing up on Linux. If you're a purist, you're not going to like it, but if you want to, you can put Edge, just like Chrome, on Linux. I've done it. If you bothered to notice on my taskbar, hang on a minute, I'll reshare the screen, whole desktop. Look at, oops, what the heck? Get out of my way. This stupid thing is trying to drive me nuts. I'll report a problem by shooting you in the head. This thing opened up whiteboard. I don't know why, but it did.
That's AI for you.
No, it's something else. It has to do with Zoom. I'm not able to show you the whole desktop for some oddball reason. Right now, it wants to hide my taskbar. But bottom line, I've got on my Linux Mint, I hope it showed up on the very first screens I shared, Edge, Chrome, Chromium, Firefox, and on a few other distros, I may have additional browsers besides those. And I will use whatever one I think is appropriate for what it is I'm wanting and trying to do. One of the reasons I put Edge on, and one of the video commentators brought up about AI. Well, I don't care who you are. Your chances of hiding from AI are zero, period. Because everything is adapting to AI or they become irrelevant. And I guarantee you it is getting into Linux because there is a new version of library for the Python programming language that gives you access to programming AI into your own programs. So that's just one example. So you're barking up the wrong way. Also, almost all the AI applications work out of a browser. Well, if you got a browser in your computer to be able to navigate the internet, you can access AI applications and use them. With Edge, I have it built into Edge because Microsoft put it into Edge. And I use it quite a bit. Bob Premick there knows about this neighbor's Nux computer that he was having problems with. And I used a Copilot very heavily trying to figure out what are some of the things outside of hardware that were causing the problems. Well, one of the problems was it kept shutting down from overheating. Well, I already know that as a tech. It's either the heatsink compound on the heatsink has dried up and not transferring heat from the CPU chip to the heatsink efficiently. And the second thing would be the cooling fan on the heatsink isn't working right. It's either working improperly or it's not working at all. Well, he had actually both problems. So I put on new heatsink compound. I ordered and got a new fan, put it on, and all the overheating problems disappeared, but other problems appeared. For example, the front USB ports weren't working correctly. All the back ports did work correctly. What the heck's going on? Well, eventually I found out, he was using a power supply that did not provide the correct voltage amperage. It was really the amperage. He had the right voltage. It was too low of amperage. it was a 65 watt power supply. For the NUCs that he has here that I've been working on, you got to have a 90 watt power supply. Bob Premick's got one that requires 120 watts.
No, I think mine's a 90. You're looking for a 65.
No, the 4.75 amps at 19 volts is 90 watts.
Okay.
And the 3.74 or something like that, that's 65 watts. And yours was 6 point something amps at 19 volts. That makes it around 120 watts.
Okay. Yeah, I know mine is higher.
Yeah. But I mean, I do have one mini, but it has hardware characteristics where I've got to have at least 150 watt power supply. And if I change the CPU chip and it works, I might need a 200 watt power supply. But that's rare. Most of them will run with a 65 watt or a 90 watt power supply. And those are plentiful and cheap, even used.
Yeah, by the way, about that AI that's showing up everywhere, Google search, of course, is putting AI into their search, and the AI summaries come up first. You can stop that from happening. There's a way of doing it. That you add a little a little piece of code into your search results, append it to your search term, and you will get a traditional result. And there's a website also that will do that for you.
Right. And it's really a good thing. But I switched from Google search to DuckDuckGo, so I don't get that.
Well, DuckDuckGo is going to do the same thing.
Well, they might.
Later.
They might. And like I said, escaping AI is impossible because every business out there is adopting it. If you wanted to go out and get a new job in a company and you've got to use a computer, or you are part of the IT department and you don't have some AI skills, you ain't got a prayer getting a job.
Okay, so Bob, can you bring up that code in the tips and tricks?
Just
Next
a moment.
month?
I can do that, but I'm going to put something into chat that's a reference article.
Okay, Peter, I see you put one in about Linux Server. Oddly enough, eventually down the road here, I'm not exactly certain when, I'm going to be working on one. But what I'm going to use isn't traditional. I'm not going to use my regular desktop boxes, which I could do. I'm using a HP Elite Desk 800 Gen 3, that's G3, SFF computer. And there's other HP computers similar to it, but they're actually narrower in width. And they only hold one hard drive. The HP Elite 800 desktop is one that holds two 3.5-inch drives. It also has a place for a 2.5-inch SATA drive and has an M.2 NVMe socket, and you can add M.2 Wi-Fi card to the system. You just have to get a kit of a back plate with two antennas and the proper length wire cables to reach to that device. And I guarantee you it'll be 35 centimeters or higher. And there are very few that will give you antenna leads that are 35 to 40 centimeters in length. But they do work. I've got an 800 G4 system, SSF, and it's got the Wi-Fi. and I got an M.2 drive in it. But that runs Windows 11. I got the G3 explicitly to be able to set up a server down the road. The doggone hard drives, good hard drives for a NAS are big bucks. And they'll cost more than everything else in the whole computer. Because I bought it off of eBay. It came with 16 gigs of memory. I don't have to add any more, but it's got 2 more slots so that I can add even more memory if I want to or need to. It came with no hard drive. I put my own in. So bottom line is I can turn it into it. I have to choose probably between Ubuntu server or Debian server. Those are the 2 most popular ones to use to make it, because usually when you're dealing with a NAS, if you go out and buy a NAS product, I don't care where you get it from, it's going to be running Linux. I guarantee you. So bottom line, I'm going to be doing it in Linux, and it'll be run eventually as headless. So when I install the stuff, it's going to be a case where I'm not going to be having a monitor, keyboard, or mouse on the server. Instead, you use one of your regular computers. It can be Windows, Mac, or Linux, and you SSH into the Linux server to make any changes.
Looking forward to it.
Well, and graphics, I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for there. Can you give me a little bit more of a breakdown on what you're looking for, like photograph type stuff or video editing or what?
Not necessarily video, photos and art. Sort of like an Inkscape or a GIMP.
Well, I've played with GIMP a little bit. I am no expert at it by any stretch of anybody's imagination. Inkscape I haven't tried. I'm not real artistic, and that's the reason why I say it. So anybody who's got knowledge in GIMP or Inkscape beyond my little limited knowledge, please let me know. Maybe you can do a better presentation of those. I can give a shot at the GIMP, but I'm not certain about that.
I'm going to have to do. Go ahead, Tom.
Linux does have a program very similar to Microsoft Paint or Paint.net, and it's called Pinta, Pinta. That's a very simple painting program.
Okay, now that one, Paint.net I use some. I'm not great on it, but that's it.
In Linux we would use Pinta in the same situations.
Okay.
There is a more advanced art and photo editing program called Krita, Krita. You usually get that as a flat pack because it has a lot of dependencies.
I've heard of it, but have never tried that or Inkscape.
Krita has a learning curve. Inkscape is unfamiliar to people because it's vector-based. You have to define your vectors. Pete, you might like that, but it is difficult for many people to learn.
Vectors work really good with all the 3D stuff, hardware.
Well, then you're going to like Inkscape. And here's the thing, guys, and I'm not joking when I say it. I learned the little bit I know of GIMP from YouTube videos. There are YouTube videos for anything and everything, including how to bathe. I'm not joking. Now, the only thing...
I'm going to go there.
The only thing...
I'm going to go there and get used to it.
The only
I would-
thing is it takes you time. You gotta take a YouTube video, you play it through to know what they're talking about. Then you go back, you play a little bit to learn one feature. Then you play a little bit more to learn another feature. And you keep doing that and building up and going over the same stuff over and over again. That's how I picked up quite a number of different things in Linux that didn't exist in the Windows environment. But I'm still behind the eight ball on Kden Live. I haven't gone deep into GIMP. I haven't needed to. Never touched Inkscape. I'm glad, Bob, you brought that up about it. And about the other programs like the one for that's like paint.net
Yeah,
and
Pinta.
Krita, which
Krita, yep.
I know about, but I've never touched. But there's
And then for video, although it's a difficult learning curve, Handbrake does exist for Linux.
yes,
for
I use
videos.
Handbrake on Windows.
But most people who do any video in Linux are more likely to use something like DaVinci Resolve, which is just easier and more intuitive.
Well, usually you do something like that. Kden Live is supposed to be pretty good too. Is similar in that respect. Handbrake is for taking, if I edit the video created for this meeting in one of those programs, it's going to create a raw MP4 file that's going to be very large. Handbrake, whether it's on Windows or Linux, will compress that down into a normal MP4 video that I can then use to post with. So those are some of the things. I know Handbrake will do some other features and functions, but I never had to get into them. I used it primarily to take edited videos and recompress them so that I could post them out there without them being so large that they say, try again. Okay, anybody got any last words?
I think we pretty well covered the Earth this time.
You
I'm
sure?
going to say aloha.
Pardon?
I'm going to say aloha.
Okay.